Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required. Subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspectives, this is Revenge of the Birds.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. Welcome back. Thank you for listening to our show once again. I'm your host, Jess Root, and I am joined, as we tend to always have after an Arizona Cardinals game, win or lose. We have Seth Cox on the line with us tonight. How are you doing today, Seth?
Good, Jess. How are you?
Doing great. We got lots and lots to talk about as we have some roster moves. We have a great game to talk about. Yes, Arizona Cardinals fans, as I'm sure you already know, the Arizona Cardinals in Week 3 held court, as they did in the division, and had another comeback win. So they're 3-0. 3-0. You're 3-0 Arizona Cardinals. Arizona Cardinals, one of 3 teams in the NFL to be 3-0, joining the Cincinnati Bengals and Philadelphia Eagles. And so, what we have is a comeback 23-14 Arizona Cardinals victory, where they got down early. They were down 14-6, and then in the second half, completely shut down the San Francisco offense, plus some meltdowns and penalties and some clutch throws by Drew Stanton. So the Cardinals are sitting at 3-0, 2 of those games having been won with their backup quarterback, Drew Stanton, leading the team on offense. And so, as well as a couple other things, there was some news today. The report came out on Seth and I are actually recording on a Tuesday evening. Tuesday evening is typically showtime. We'll have this posted by the time you hear this show. It will probably be Wednesday morning-ish, probably, assuming we don't have any technical difficulties with the audio. Last week's show was delayed a little bit as I had some issues with uploading the audio. But tonight's show, we will be talking about the 49ers game. We're talking about the Cardinals playoffs. So we're going to talk about Drew Stanton. Is there perhaps a budding quarterback controversy? I can't even say that with a straight face. I can't even pretend to say that's even close. And we've got a roster move to talk about. Revenge of the Birds Radio is brought to you by Audible.com, the internet's leading source of audio content, podcasts, audiobooks, whatever you want. Audible.com has got it. And for Revenge of the Birds Radio listeners, you guys can get yourself a deal. We've got a special offer for you. Go to audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds. Again, audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds. And try out the Audible service. Try it out. No cost at all. And in addition to that, the kind of the perk that they give you, they'll give you a free audiobook download. So you can test out the site for a month, use that credit to download the audiobook of your choice. Listen away. If you like it, continue on with the service. That is a fantastic service. They all sorts of audio content, especially if you like to read and don't really have the time to read, but you spend your time in your car or on your iPod or whatever it is that you listen to. You can listen to quality audio content, whether books, podcasts, and the sort. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds. Give it a try. And audible.com brings you Revenge of the Birds Radio. So to start off, the Arizona Cardinals made a pair of roster moves on Tuesday. The rumor came out on Monday that they had poached, stolen, whatever you want to call it, running back Marion Grice. Arizona Cardinals fans, those of you who are local, will likely be very familiar with Marion Grice, as he was a standout at Arizona State University as a JUCO transfer. That's his 2 seasons there, putting seemingly every time he touched the ball, he was headed towards the end zone. But they signed him off the Chargers, the San Diego Chargers practice squad, signed him to the active roster today, and he replaces punter Drew Butler, who has had an up and down relationship with the Cardinals so far, getting signed and cut, then signed and cut, and, well, depending on the health of Dave Zastil, if he is healthy, he will continue. And the Arizona Cardinals have a bye week, so they have a new running back. They re-signed, that is, after the whole Jonathan Dwyer mess last week. And at this point, it's already boiled over. So I kind of gone off the radar a bit. We don't need to talk about Jonathan Dwyer. He is on the non-football illness list. They replaced him on the roster with Jalen Parmalee, whom they re-signed to be their goal line short yardage back. And then the addition of Grice gives them 5 running backs, something we saw them do a season ago, 5 running backs when they also had Ryan Williams, although he was inactive the entire time. So before we get into the meat and potatoes, let's say, of the show, where we talk about the game, and we're going to talk about the game, we're going to talk about the defensive adjustments, we're going to talk about, well, should we give the Cardinals credit for the win? Should we give the 49ers credit for losing? Should we criticize their composure? We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about how Colin Kaepernick was shredding. Is there a reason for concern, or were the adjustments what they needed? We'll talk about some of the defensive changes that we saw during the game. Drew Stanton, talk about the bye week, and then last we'll talk about, well, what exactly is this team? Are we ready to declare them contenders after 3 games? Are we ready to do that? But let's start with Marion Grice. Now, Seth is our resident draft expert. He does a lot of analysis, not just for Revenge of the Birds, but also ArizonaSports.com, and anywhere he can lend his opinion and skills. Tell us about Marion Grice. What do you like about the signing? What limitations does he have? And what does he offer to the Cardinals?
When you look at Grice and kind of the guy they brought in, he's a guy that can do a lot of things well, but he's not going to be a back that is going to wow you in any way. I think what he is he's kind of like Stephon Taylor, just probably, well, hopefully better, and I think that's kind of what they're looking at right now. He's not a burner by any means. Anybody that watched him at ASU knows that. He's a guy that is able to make plays if he's with excellent vision. The fact that he gets to and through the hole kind of at the same speed that he does when he's running by defenders. He's not necessarily very fast, but he's quick and decisive in his cuts. I call him kind of a glider in terms of how he runs. He's not a big back by any means, so it's interesting that they lost Dwyer, who's their quote unquote between the tackle guys, and now he's a guy, and they bring in a guy that's kind of a poor man's Andre Ellington in what he does. He's not going to – I wonder about this signing and the fact that he doesn't really bring them a change of pace in terms of what Ellington does. He's just kind of more of the same of Ellington, just like I said, as a lesser prospect, or runner. He's definitely most comfortable as a third down back. He's gonna be a guy that, as ASU fans know, catches the ball extremely well out of the backfield, and he's excellent in pass pro. So you're talking about a guy that kind of does in the run game what you already have, and then his pluses are the fact that he will be able to come in and probably just help Stephon Taylor not see the field at all at this juncture. So.
Well, and the way I see it, and I got confirmation from you to make sure that was an apt comparison, and I said, basically, I see Marion Grice, and when we talked about the draft show way months ago, we talked about some players. We talked about Marion Grice as kind of a guy I felt was a guy who could make a long NFL career and wouldn't necessarily be a spectacular back. And the guy I kind of compare him to is Chester Taylor. Kind of the same build, about the same speed. And Cardinals fans will cringe when they hear Chester Taylor because the Chester Taylor they got was a 10-year veteran who was barely able to walk, it seems. But if you look at the big perspective, Chester Taylor had a 10-year NFL career. He, even 1 year, back in 2005, I believe it was, ran for over 1,200 yards for Minnesota. Very productive, very good in many ways, played special teams. He could block. He was a good third down guy, could catch the ball, and was definitely valuable. And he was a good guy to have when the Vikings drafted Adrian Peterson. It was a good guy to have behind him. And Grice I see as being able to do that. Harold Goodwin, when he was asked about the signing of Grice, he said, we had to replace Jonathan Dwyer. Grice had a great preseason in San Diego. He can catch the ball and can do the things we wanted to do. So basically, he offers the Cardinals something that they can do. Now, I don't recall. I watched every down that pretty much Grice played at ASU, both on the road. And he wasn't a guy. I know they like to line up. They like to move Ellington out wide. It's not something that Grice is really suited for, but he is a good option out of the backfield as a dump off or those easy little routes that running backs can run, just as a good option up there. I like the signing. I am realistic. He's not fast, which is you need speed at that position. You either need great speed or great vision and great patience. And luckily, he's got the good vision. But outside of that, we'll see how he fits in and how he can produce. And it's something that we have noted previously. Just kind of, it seems that after last year, in the offseason, when Steve Keim said real good things about Stephon Taylor, they're really not terribly impressed with him. He's kind of there. He basically in that. He got one in that opener. He got himself one drive, and he was productive. Had a couple of rushes, had some catches, and he scored the touchdown. But it just seems that they're not just thrilled with what he can do. He's not terribly productive in the running game. And it'll be interesting to see how they use him. Will they use Grice? I mean, will they use him as their short yardage back? I thought for sure Jalen Parmalee would be gone. But instead they let Butler go, which makes sense. Of course, that could mean, Parmalee's the next guy to go at some point. Interesting to note, since they signed him off of another team's practice squad, the Cardinals cannot cut him for at least 3 weeks. Not to say that would be a possibility, because they do like the prospect. But how do you see him being used? Do you see him as being Stephon Taylor instead of Stephon Taylor? Is he gonna move into the Dwyer role like the main backup, or eventually move into the backup once he knows the offense, with Parmalee getting those short yardage carries?
Yeah, I think their ultimate goal is to see him as the main backup. Right now, he'll probably just come in and get the Taylor snaps, or maybe and I think we're both basing our comments on Taylor off of what Mike Jurecki kind of tweeted out today about their lack of enthusiasm, I guess you could say, on what Taylor's done so far. So I think both of us are kind of using that as their.
But we've talked about this before, is back in the preseason as well, because where it happened when suddenly Dwyer moved up. So it's not just today. I've kind of gotten that feeling that they haven't loved Dwyer. They like what he can do, but he's just kind of there.
Yeah, and that's probably true. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see probably Ellington. I mean, who got carries in that game? To be honest with you, I can't even remember who. Parmalee got one, and then were there any other people with carries in that game?
I'm gonna have to check. For some reason,
it
slips. Taylor got one. I think, Taylor got one.
Yeah, so
Ted Ginn got one. And Drew Stanton ran the ball 6 times. Yeah.
Yes, so I think that's kind of what you're going to see for the next couple of weeks until, maybe Grice gets caught up to speed quick enough that he can go in there and be a difference maker and play. But I think right now you're just going to see more Ellington, which I think you and I agree is not a bad thing. So you'll see more Ellington and less of a second running back, and then after maybe Washington, maybe Oakland. That'll be 3 weeks into the kind of Cardinals way of doing things for Grice. Maybe he'll start getting those Dwyer carries. We'll see that. I think that's what their goal is. Obviously, the difference being, can he do it successfully? Because if you go back and watch Grice in the preseason, you saw a lot of, I guess the word would be indifference in how he ran. If you watch him in the Cardinals game, you're like, wow, this is a guy that he's going to be a player in this league. And then you watch him in the other 3 games, and you're like, wow, this guy doesn't really look like he belongs on a roster. So I think that's where you're kind of at right now. Is you're going to wait and see how he does against Denver. Maybe he gets that Jalen Parmalee carry, and maybe he goes for 2 yards instead of not gaining any, and that kind of opens things up instead of, like you said, it doesn't seem like they're super excited about Stephon Taylor. And this was something you and I talked about in the preseason about my concern with the lack of depth at running back and what they didn't have outside of Andre Ellington. And now it's, it's not necessarily come home to roost yet, but you look at, like you said, the carries. You basically had 21 carries from running backs, and 18 were Ellington, and
that's not what you envisioned at the start of the year.
No, well, that, and you kind of look at it statistically, and it wasn't necessarily his brightest game. And something that you and I talked about is he's kind of a guy that he's almost that perfect second running back in Ellington, where you can get a big play from him as another guy's wearing it, the defense down, and now all of a sudden those big plays maybe aren't there right now because there's nobody to play that wear the team down role. So maybe that's what they envision with Grice for a couple, in a couple 3 games, and we'll see what happens.
Well, and yeah, I think the Grice move is very, very hasty and very timely, because it looked like that he might be the guy that they bring up, that they promote to the roster to replace their running back issues that the Chargers are having. And so the Cardinals, I think, are not looking. Maybe it's probably not this year, which is kind of like, if you have to look, let's look at the guy that made the roster, Glenn Carson, who is yet to be active. They liked what he did, but yet they haven't seen him. We haven't seen him do anything. He's been inactive every single game. It's an eye to the future, I think, where they believe that Grayson is a guy that they really had their eyes on. They probably would have drafted had he fallen to their draft spot. They would have liked to have taken him, but they didn't. So I think this is the case. Not necessarily maybe if he does anything this year, it's a bonus, but it's more looking toward 2015, especially when they really don't have anything outside of Ellington. Talking about, so we got the Grice signing, you've got this move. Let's talk about the San Francisco thing. we're finally kind of on the national map again, and we got this in 2012, and yes, 2012 ended up being a dumpster fire. However, the Cardinals did, and I wrote on Saturday. I wrote this for last Saturday that was a must-win game for the Cardinals, and not necessarily for the Cardinals' help, but to really decide is this team a playoff team? They had to win this game because of so many reasons, because of the dominance that the 49ers have had, because of how many players that they were down, because they're playing at home, because they play in such a tough division. You can't afford to really lose any home games. In a division, it's a bad idea to get swept, and so you need to pick up that home win. And I said, instead of my column, that if they lose, that we're going to be able to point back to this game as saying that's why they didn't make the playoffs. They won, and then they did so in very impressive fashion. It didn't look good early, but the Cardinals come away with the 23-14 victory. Let's look at the whole. How much do you want to give credit to the Cardinals? How much do you want to blame the 49ers? And how much of it could just be luck with the flags? Or how do you see? Because we're seeing it kind of both sides. I turned on one of the ESPN shows yesterday if I got home from work, and they weren't talking about the Cardinals at all. They had Colin Kaepernick on the screen. They were talking about what's wrong with the 49ers. Can't remember who it was that said very clearly that the Cardinals aren't on the same level as these other teams. I think they're mistaken. This team is so what credit do I give it?
Well,
I don't know.
I think for me, when I look at this game and I'm going over my notes and I want to make sure I get this right before I say anything, so I just went back and recounted to make sure I'm right. Obviously, the Cardinals ran the ball more than the 49ers, which I don't think anybody would have guessed that would have happened before the game. Just by 3 rushing attempts. So it's not like a ton or anything like that, but 3 rushing attempts. But Andre Ellington ran the ball twice as much as Frank Gore and Carlos Hyde combined.
Yes.
And I think when you look at if you want to percentage it out and everything, I think when you look at it and you say the Cardinals should get all the credit because it's not their fault that the 49ers decided to run the ball 8 times in the second half. So they had 24 rushing attempts, the 49ers, 16 in the first half. And I don't think by any coincidence they were winning at halftime 14-6. The Cardinals came out, put a quick score on the board in the second half after getting a quick, I think they gave up 1 first down, right, in that first series.
That sounds right, yes.
Yeah, when they came back out, they gave up 1 first down. Okay. And then, but the 49ers just abandoned the running game. And most people would say, well, why would you want to run on the Cardinals? They have, a top 5 run defense in the NFL. Well, they do have a top 5 run defense in the NFL, and their pass defense, I think, is like 18th or 20th right now or something like that. And then, they can't generate a pass rush to save their life, blah, blah, blah. But you're talking about the 49ers. You're talking about a team that lives and dies by the running game. So why are you changing who you are philosophically as a team and going in a different route? And I think that is why you look at it and you go, okay, you can blame the 49ers as much as you want, but the 49ers were the ones that decided, hey, I'm going to come out and throw the ball a million times in the second half. So just ignore the fact that we are a running team and we're just going to throw the ball over the field and deal with the consequences. And the consequences were Colin Kaepernick sucked in the second half after being probably playing the best half of football as any quarterback in the NFL in the first half, where he basically single-handedly dominated the Cardinals.
And that was something to watch. Very dominant performance, and to the point you're talking about the running the ball, I'm going to pull that a little bit. They didn't even really run the ball in the first half, mind you. They didn't really do that because 9 of those carries were Kaepernick. 9 of those rushes were Kaepernick, and probably 3 or 4 of those, I didn't count. Haven't gone through the count, were on pass plays that he got away from and ended up running that became running plays. I had it as 3. So yeah, so he had 9 rushes. 6 of them were runs, and then he had 3 where he scrambled away and got away from the pressure that they had. But he was just everywhere in the field. And the bad ones you're talking about, they changed the game plan. The Cardinals did that to them. The Cardinals did that to them because of what they saw in their last meeting, Week 17. Now, in Week 6 a year ago, San Francisco was not successful. Well, was successful running the ball. In fact, after the Larry Fitzgerald fumble, they did that 18-play, 9-minute drive. 12 of those plays were running the ball. In fact, that's the only game in which a running back went over 100 yards. Frank Gore did it a year ago with 101. But in Week 17, different story. Frank Gore, 13 carries, 14 yards. And I think whether it was Harbaugh just getting too cute with his defense, so outthinking himself rather than taking his strength, which is, hey, they got Frank Gore. He's really good. They got Carlos Hyde, who looks like he's going to be really good. And they looked at the Cardinals' defense and said, oh, they stopped the run really well, and they cover the deep ball well, so let's dink and dunk, and so let's do this and that, and they don't have the speed to cover Kaepernick. So, and it was being successful early on, except the Cardinals made adjustments, and then they didn't have anything to go to. So you have to, at least in that sense, you have to give the Cardinals some credit because of what they did in Week 17. They completely shut down that running game, and it was Kaepernick that made plays for them in Week 17 to get them down the field. As for the 49ers melt, I don't know what to think of that. They were just, I don't know if they're kind of taking the personality of their coach with all the off-season rumors that he might be leaving or how he doesn't have a contract after this year. There's the Michigan job that's probably going to be open in the off-season. Or did Dennis Erickson suddenly start coaching the 49ers because all those penalties? Just goodness, the penalties and the penalties. And they were complaining that it wasn't. I mean, Anquan Bolden crying about the penalties when I couldn't believe he did that because he was a dude that blatantly headbutted Tony Jefferson. When the most Anquan Bolden penalties that you can possibly have. I give the Cardinals credit, and you have to. After a little bit humming and hawing, you have to give the Cardinals credit for pretty much everything that happened. They took advantage of the second half jitters. I think the second half of their first 2 games got in their head, and the Cardinals jumped all over that. Plus the fact that Todd Bowles is quite amazing at what he does defensively. He comes with the plan, he sees how it goes, and he tweaks it just a little bit, or he talks his players into doing better, and they just win every second half. And so the credit goes to the Cardinals. Now, yes, there were some fortunate things. The Pro Football Focus noted 2 or 3 throws that Stanton had that probably should have been picked off. But not every quarterback has every bad throw picked off. So Carson Palmer is a perfect example of that. He's been known to be very lucky in that sense. So I give 95% of the credit to that win to the Cardinals being the reason why they won, not only for their execution, but because of what they had done previously that led the 49ers to change what their game plan was.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, and it just comes down to the fact that they executed really, really well, and they did what they need to do in terms of if the 49ers are going to come out into a spread offense and throw the ball around like a bunch of crazy people, you're going to invite that in. And every time as the Cardinals, you're going to say, okay, that's fine, do that, and we're going to beat you. And that's what happened. I mean, that's just what it is the 49ers said, we're going to take advantage of your weakness, which right now is, kind of the Cardinals' inability to get a pass rush, and instead they decided to throw the ball all over the field, and like you said, 6 of his first 9 runs were designed, but they were using that read option, and really, if you watch it, the Cardinals had no chance. I mean, I think his average on those read option plays were, I had it at like 7.5 yards per carry. So you're talking about the fact that literally every time they ran that play, it was going to be a first down. And that's how it was going to be. And they went away from it. And it's not like they went away from it because the Cardinals just shut it down. They just went away from it, and they said, okay, we're gonna put you in the pocket, Colin, and we're gonna have you throw these. We're gonna go 4 wide, and we're gonna spread them out, and because that's how you beat the Cardinals. Well, it is how you beat the Cardinals if you have a traditional pocket passing quarterback. That's not Colin Kaepernick's strength. That's not what he does well. That's not what he did well in the first half. And I don't know, like. You look at it and you say thank you. That's all you do as a Cardinals fan and and the Cardinals. Thank you for going away from your strength, trying to make your quarterback do something he's not comfortable doing. And you know what? The Cardinals took advantage. They dropped into a lot of zone coverages. It looked like, they were making him move off his first read and get to his second read. And then when he was doing that, all of a sudden he was looking to bail out of the pocket, but the Cardinals weren't necessarily rushing hard upfield. They were playing that kind of contained rush that they did against Russell Wilson last year. And then when he tried to move, all of a sudden they were there. So those, runs off of passing plays that were going for, plus 8, plus 10, were all of a sudden going for plus 2, plus 3. And, now instead of it being 2nd and 1 or 1st and 10, it was 2nd and 8. And that makes a huge difference in play calling because, then I forget who their offensive coordinator is, but
Greg Roman. They hate him. They hate him.
They do. 49ers fans absolutely hate Greg Roman, and it's kind of funny to listen to. But I give the Cardinals 100% credit on that. You know what? If the 49ers are going to change who they are philosophically, then as a team, you've already won, in my mind. Because, while they weren't doing the traditional power run, zone run, strong running game that we see from the 49ers, they were running the read option, and they were picking up chunks of yardage, and then they were moving Kaepernick out of the pocket, getting him, outside and letting him throw the ball around. And the Cardinals, you look at it, took them until almost the entire first half to force a punt. There was 30 seconds left in the first half before they forced their first punt.
Yeah.
That's just the 49ers dominated the Cardinals defense, and I text you this during the game, the Cardinals offense, while they didn't finish like you would normally like to see them finish, they absolutely did a great job of chewing up clock and keeping the ball out of Kaepernick's hands. The 49ers got 1 possession in the first quarter, and they got 2 possessions. One was when the Cardinals finally forced a punt in the second quarter. That's awesome. And like I said, the Cardinals are down 14-6, but you know what? They ate up so much clock. So all of a sudden, then they couldn't do more damage And then Bowles got in at halftime, made his adjustments, and Roman, for whatever reason, played into his hands. And you know what? Todd Bowles ate him alive, and that's what Todd Bowles does, and that's why he's not going to be the Cardinals' defensive coordinator next year.
Probably not. That's a discussion for another day, because let's go with this happy time. To the credit, one of the comments that who was it that said what adjustments they made? Arian said it after the game. What were the adjustments? One of the reporters asked. They talked about the adjustments. So what were they? And they talked about they got up a little closer on the receivers. So that they didn't have as much space right at the beginning. They got someone assigned. It sounded like it wasn't necessarily spy, but kind of had someone assigned to Kaepernick, which they might not have had as quickly in the first half. And which would go, I mean, Kaepernick, he ran 4 times in the second half for only, he went 9 times for 45 in the first half and 4 for 9 in the second half. And so they kept him contained. And the coordinators just plain didn't believe in that they could be successful in the traditional running game. And I think that's what the case was. And what we're seeing, because if you look at the final numbers, at least the throwing numbers of both Eli Manning and Colin Kaepernick, and you have 2 quarterbacks that really, if you look at their completion percentage, shredded the Cardinals. But then you see what their offensive production actually was. That weakness that the Cardinals apparently have in the middle of the field really isn't much of a weakness, because they take away the running game and they take away down the field, and all you're left is a dink and dunk. And guess what they're doing? They're forcing possessions to end before you can get all the way down the field, rather than, we'll take San Diego. San Diego's offense is built on that. Move it slowly, methodically all the way down the field. And they just weren't able to do that except for a pair of drives. So that weakness that the Cardinals have defensively, or what we consider a weakness, might actually be as good a weakness as you can have, because they don't get gashed in the running game, and they really don't get beat down the field because of the coverage they get from their corners and their safety play. They're just having to manage the short yardage stuff. And while early on they were getting chunks, they weren't later in the game, and so they were in 3rd and long situations.
And you look at what they did, and like you said, statistically speaking, 29 of 37, 245 and a touchdown. But that 37 for 245, that's only 6 yards per attempt. You'll live with that all day as a defensive coordinator, letting them only get 6 yards per pass attempt. And like I said, I'd be interested, because I didn't do it, but I'd be interested to break down what the difference was in yards per attempt in the first half and the second half. You talked about the spy. I tweeted about that, and I think it was at the beginning of the third quarter. Looked like they put Tony Jefferson in the middle of the field and said basically, unless Colin Kaepernick runs, don't move from that spot, which is fine. I mean, that's what you want to do. You force Kaepernick to make throws into windows outside the hashes, take away that middle of the field. They love to run those drags and those deep seam routes. No Vernon Davis, so that kind of took away a weapon, but they were so aggressive in their approach. It was fun to watch, and I thought they did an excellent job defensively, just to kind of combat everything that the 49ers do well. And like I said, when the 49ers abandoned the run game, it kind of played into Bowles' hands, because now all of a sudden, okay, I don't have to play Kevin Minter, and I don't think he got but 5 snaps in the second half. I'll have to go back and look at my notes.
Yeah, it was Buchanan that second half.
Yep, and so all of a sudden you got all that, you get all that ability to go sideline to sideline, to drop into coverage, and you know what? Just played in the Cardinals' strength, and it allowed their defense to do what they do, which is swarm and make plays. So.
To your point on the splits, the Kaepernick splits for the first half, the second were real similar. He was 14 of 18 for 116 in the first half. That's 6.4 per attempt. He went 14 of 18 in the first half. He went 14 of 19 in the second half, I think, for 128. So the splits were almost identical. It just felt, that's the weird thing. It just felt way different at the beginning of the game because add in his mobility, and it seemed that the Cardinals had no answer for Colin Kaepernick. But at least the difference was they took away the mobility part. They kind of collapsed what they were able to do, what Colin was able to do, because their historic numbers were almost identical from one half to the next.
Yeah, and then you just kind of look at what they forced the 49ers to do, and that was to feed Stevie Johnson, and you look at that and you're like, okay, well, if you're going to give the ball to Stevie Johnson, you're comfortable with that. He had the one big play, I think it was for like 30 something yards, 32 yards, where Rashad got caught up. I think it was a zone coverage, but it might have been man. It just looked like Rashad got caught up, and kind of gave up the big play. But that was really it in the passing game. I mean, to
the point, big plays. Cardinals had 7 plays of at least 20 yards. San Francisco 3.
Yeah, and I think one was a catch to the tight end, which shocking, right?
And it was early in the game. It was early in the game, so.
Well, and the thing is, and you have to look at this. The 49ers were without Vernon Davis and Vance McDonald, and I think the Cardinals knew that, and like I think it was Minter that was in on the big play to the tight end, and let's just call it like it is. That's really not what Kevin Minter's good at right now, and so I think, like I said, I think he only played 5 snaps in the second half or less, and the reason why was because Bowles saw what they were doing. Okay, you're going to spread us out and try to throw the ball. I'm going to put Deon Buchanan in there, and I'm going to make you try to throw the ball, and I'm going to drop my guys into a zone coverage, and I'm going to try to make you throw into tight windows because I got guys like Antonio Cromartie, and people are beating up on Gerard Powers, but Powers is a good little slot corner. Tyrann Mathieu, I don't think played very much in the second half either, if I go back and look.
No, he got in a few. Most of his stuff was in the first half, and it was maybe 2 or 3. It was when, if I recall, the second half he came in. It was when they added a couple of the 7 defensive back looks.
Yeah, and so they were, it was mostly Powers, and then I mean, we can talk about this, but I was really interested that Bethel came in when Cromartie got hurt. I don't know if that was lack of confidence in what Matthew did in his short snaps, or how they decided to do that, or if it's just they didn't want to. You and I talked about it before. They would probably only give him 15 to 20 snaps. They gave him the 15. So maybe that was just the plan to get him, those 15 to 20 snaps, and it just happened, unfortunately, to coincide with Cromartie going down, and they didn't want to change that, so they put Bethel out there. I mean, obviously, it's speculation on my part, but
I can tell you from what I've observed so far, Matthew hasn't played a single down of technically cornerback. They haven't had him in the slot yet. They have yet to sub Powers out for Matthew. They just don't have him playing that role yet. They had him as a roving 7th defensive back against New York. They had him playing, interestingly enough, subbing in for Tony Jefferson, not Rashad Johnson, when he played safety. And I think that's the case. They're not ready for him to play. They're confident in Gerard Powers in the slot. And so and this was actually said after the game, Todd Bowles said that Bethel was, now, I don't know if this was going to happen, but Bethel was going to play anyway. That was in the game plan to get Bethel some snaps. Interestingly enough, I read a little bit into it, is that what they were going to do is they were going to put Crow inside its slot and bring Bethel in on the outside. which kind of tells you that it was kind of, I think it was kind of a message to Gerard Powers. Okay, we've loved you so far, but you can't do what you did last week. And so the game plan, whether or not that's true or if it was actually going to happen, Todd Bowles said that he had intended on getting Bethel some snaps. He was going to play outside, and Cromartie was going to slide inside, interestingly enough. And so, yeah, so they brought in Bethel. They had Powers on the outside in standard sets and base sets, but then they moved inside and brought Bethel in on the nickel thing. But that's my thing is why they didn't go with Matthew. He hasn't played it down of corner yet.
Well, and then you just look at the defensive snap count. You had your article up today that you do every week, and you know, Campbell, Johnson, and Foote played every down. Peterson was only off, I think, in one goal line situation. Is that right?
It was. Yes, it was, because that's when they use Powers, not Powers. They use Johnson and Buchanan as the only DBs in those goal line sets.
Okay, and then Jefferson and Powers. I mean, they played basically the same amount of snaps. The interesting one to me was Kareem Martin. They obviously felt like he can do something in pass rush because they gave him 39 snaps this week, and you know, you've talked about it before. They run a 3-4, but they go into that kind of 4-2-5 or 4-1-6, whatever you want to call it, and they let Martin put his hand in the dirt as a pass rusher and kind of slide Campbell down. I thought it was pretty effective. I mean, he obviously didn't do a ton, but I thought it was interesting that that was their move over maybe Kaiser. I think the Kaiser experiment's kind of over. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I think they were really disappointed in Kaiser last week, giving him all those snaps, and he literally was basically useless. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, when you say stuff like that, it sounds bad, and I know that. But I just think they were like, okay, well, let's see if somebody else can do something. And then the other interesting thing is, basically, Martin's snaps coincided with taking Sam Acho off the field. So, you know, that's another interesting thing to kind of look at, how they're already experimenting with Martin in different ways.
Yeah, well, and the thing with Martin is interesting enough is when they drafted him, they said, Bruce Arians said originally, yeah, we're going to have him outside and then inside on some other things, and it's kind of turned the other way. We saw him in the preseason play a lot of, call what you want. I'm going by what I know the Cardinals call it, and so and I don't. Maybe I was just being dumb, but I finally figured out what, you know, they go from their 3-4 where they've got the nose tackle. Why they take the nose tackle out? So they go with the 2 defensive linemen and 2 outside linebackers. Then there's on the nickel or dime, and then you've got your traditional 4-man front. That way, those edge guys, they don't have to ever go into coverage ever because you're rushing 4 all the time, rather than in the base set where you're going to drop somebody probably sometimes. And so it doesn't really matter if you call it an outside linebacker or a defensive end, because that outside linebacker position is essentially a defensive end in those situations. But the Cardinals still call it outside linebacker. It was an interesting conversation I had with Matt Shaughnessy last year, because I would chart things based on whether he was standing up or he had his hand in the dirt. And I asked, and he said, no, I'm just playing outside linebacker. I'm not playing defensive end this year. He's playing all that, and it's just a matter of what he wants to do, whether he's standing up or whether he's got his hand in the dirt. And that's the case we see in the Alex Okafor, and I'm guessing now Kareem Martin. They're playing outside linebacker, and they just get to choose whichever they're comfortable with, whether they're in the dirt, whether they go to the 3-point or the 2-point stance. I do like the Kareem Martin move. That's what I've been waiting for. Unfortunately, it came after John Abraham was put on IR, because we talked about it before the season, after the draft and leading up to the preseason, how I was gushing about the possibility of having, you know, Dockett and Campbell and then Abraham and Martin off the edge as being this amazing pass rush. We haven't seen it, but I mean, as the potential of being a very disruptive pass rush, and I'm glad to see that they did that. Kaiser actually, you know, Kaiser was effective in his smaller number of snaps against San Diego. In 50 snaps, he was awful. And then in a limited amount of snaps, he did have the impact because he did almost get Kaepernick, had him by the jersey, and he slipped away and got away. So it looks as though Kizer, I don't think he's a complete waste of a roster space because he tends, if he's got less responsibility or less snap count, he seems to be more productive.
He's definitely a specialist, if you want to use that term really loosely, as a pass rusher, and I think that's really all you want him to do at this point. And that's not a bad thing. You need a guy that can come in and kind of bring it off the edge a couple times a game. I think, 13 snaps. He rushed the passer 8 times. Dropped into coverage twice, which is always interesting to me because I would have to go back and look because I don't have it in my notes, but who then was rushing the passer in those two where he dropped into coverage, or was it kind of flats coverage? I don't know. But I'm interested to see what they do with Butler at this point and how they make that work out as opposed to Kizer. Is he going to take Kizer's snaps because he hasn't really done anything? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see on that.
At this point at outside linebacker, it almost feels to me that anybody with any sort of possible potential, they're just picking stuff off the ground and chucking it up at chucking it at the wall and see if something sticks. That's the impression I'm getting. Kizer, I don't know how much they just say, hey, we're going to put him out there to see what that is. Oh, not so good. Let's find Vic Butler. Oh, let's see. He hasn't played yet. So let's put him out there in a couple of weeks. If that doesn't, we'll try something else. When all along I was hoping, get Curry Martin out there if that's what he needs to do. He needs the reps. Since he, let him do what he was good at, and that was getting after the quarterback and hopefully get some disruption out there. Another defensive thing I wanted to notice, and I noticed it last week as well, and Cardinals fans I know in the community have been a little bit down on the tackling play of Rashad Johnson. However, based on his playing time, I can tell you this. Rashad Johnson apparently has the trust of his coaches. Guy doesn't leave the field at all. And
I think his missed tackles are – you never want to downplay missed tackle, but I think his missed tackles happen in like the worst possible times ever.
Yes.
And so they get, I don't want to say exposed, but they get blown out of proportion where he misses an open field tackle, where Larry Foote misses an open field tackle, but luckily there's 3 people behind him that can make the play after he misses the tackle. So, it is what it is. I think, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you know better than me, but I feel like he's kind of in charge of the defense at this point, and he's the guy making all the calls, and he's the guy that's, telling people where to get lined up, and he's making the coverage calls on the back end. And again, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that's.
And Johnson is like a coach on the field. That's the way he's been portrayed, and he's even though he's only got a few years, he's not old in the league, but he's been around long enough that he's an important player on the field. And the reason why I thought it was interesting, the fact that he never leaves the field, is because who was losing snaps last year to Tyrann Mathieu? It was Rashad Johnson. Who lost the starting job to Tyrann Mathieu? That was Rashad Johnson. But when they worked Mathieu in on Sunday, he wasn't taking Rashad Johnson's snaps. He was taking Tony Jefferson's.
And to be completely honest, I don't understand that. But, I mean, it's worked, so you're not really going to want to question it too much.
Well, and it looked like what they were doing with Mathieu is they had Mathieu. I didn't chart it completely out, but my observations were on the dime packages that they ran out there for the pass, that's when they got Mathieu in there and took Jefferson out, at least in the first half, which kind of plays more to Mathieu's strength, as he's very instinctive in coverage. And Jefferson is still a little bit of an unknown when it comes to he's had a little ups and downs, at least in coverage so far, but where he's stronger, of course, we've seen in the box, and he's been very productive, number 1 in the league in tackles right now. But in the fact that Mathieu's 15 snaps, he got 6 tackles, Jefferson snaps went down, but he still led the team in tackles. He's been very productive. And this is something I've said all along. I'm really interested to see how playing time plays out. Are they doing kind of what they did in 2012 with Horton, or are they kind of, rather than a true strong safety, free safety, it was more side of the field, or how they did it? But it looks like at least for now, because Matthew is definitely a free safety, and they're dropping Rashad back because he's basically playing strong safety again, which he's played a little bit before Arians. So that was kind of an interesting thing I saw at least with Matthew.
Yeah, and what it looks like they're doing is basically saying, like you said, Rashad, you're the free safety. Okay, we're going to bring Matthew in. He's going to play rover, and we're going to have you play kind of middle of the field, or this side of the field or that side of the field, Rashad, and let Tyrann. And we're talking about 20 snaps, so it's not like we're talking a huge, a huge summary here. So
right.
So it's interesting how they're dividing up the secondary. They have a lot of talent in that secondary. So I think right now we're just all anxious to see. I think everybody's happy with how it's going right now, so you're not getting as much talk about why isn't Dion Buchanan playing more, and why isn't Tyrann Mathieu getting more snaps, and blah blah blah, because winning makes that easy to gloss over at this point, and rightfully so.
And the one other thing defensively that really caught my eye early on, because it actually threw me for a loop when I was trying to chart while I was watching the game, the formations, Dan Williams was out there with Calais Campbell in nickel and dime packages. Now, he didn't play. I mean, he played as many snaps as I think he's ever played in a game, but he wasn't just the base nose tackle. He was a pass rushing. Now, he was, when they went to their two-man line, he was playing Darnell Dockett's position. The same, he was playing in the spot. So he and Tommy Kelly and Frosty Rucker were all subbing in and out. And the comment that I heard on the radio show, the pregame show before when I was driving into the stadium, is that Dan Williams had a fantastic week of practice, and it made me excited because Dan Williams is the guy that wanted to see what he could do in that, but he's only ever been asked to just the one thing: hey, clog the middle on running plays, where he's been super productive. And it was interesting to see, and I think it was because of San Francisco that they kept Dan Williams out there as a run option defender, because of, say, if they split it once with the personnel's out there, they wanted to still be able to really disrupt that offensive line for the running gaps as well.
Yeah, and he typically, these are usually his highest snap games. He played 44 snaps last year. Obviously, that was the game that Te'amu tore his ACL, so that might have been why. But the first game against San Francisco, he played 36. So that's more typical of what they like to do with him, is they want him in the game when they feel like they're going to face run-heavy teams, and because, like you said, he's fantastic as a run-stuffing defensive nose tackle, and that's what he does. He did a good job collapsing the pocket a couple times. It's definitely not his strength, but it's interesting to watch them use him in different ways each and every week. It just kind of shows the creativity that the Bulls has.
Let's talk about the one thing that is kind of ridiculous, although it's been great. Drew Stanton now 3 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions in his 2 games. He improved his play on Sunday, where he completed 55% of his passes for just over 250 yards, got the 2 scores to John Brown. And then all of a sudden, Adam Shine on NFL.com is saying why the Cardinals need to ride Stanton. No matter, you start Stanton instead of Palmer, and they're essentially talking turnovers. Stop that train now. Now, granted, Stanton's been great. He's been okay. He's been good. He's been more than good. He's been plenty good for what the Cardinals need. He wasn't great against New York. He suffered some drops. He had some issues on some throws against San Francisco, but he's tough. He was effective. And I'm going to say it again. Seeing Drew Stanton succeed and win those 2 games, this is what the Cardinals envisioned out of Kevin Kolb, a healthy Kevin Kolb. I keep saying they're more or less the same type of quarterback. The difference being Kevin Kolb's body just didn't hold up. Because Kevin Kolb's best games, and I wrote it the day before about what we can expect from Drew Stanton, and I pointed to Kevin Kolb's best games, and that is completing 55 to 60% of his passes. He's not a volume yard thrower. He's not going to be Carson Palmer is much better. He is a better quarterback. And no one should say anything different. Carson Palmer is a much better quarterback than any other player that they have on that roster. But if you get Drew Stanton playing like the way Drew Stanton did, the Cardinals can win games, which is what the Cardinals, when they got Kevin Kolb, envisioned them winning games like that. They weren't going to have a dominating offense, but they were going to be able to do enough offensively and take care of the ball and be smart to win games. And that's what Drew Stanton did. Do you want that? Is that what you want as your starting quarterback when you have a Carson Palmer option? You don't. You take Carson Palmer every single time. But they can live with it, and which is especially when we look back to 2012. Oh my gosh, they went from Kevin. Well, obviously, it kind of has the same vibe because if you look at it the same way, Kevin Kolb was technically the backup quarterback when the season started. So the starter gets hurt, then they go on a roll. They end up 4-0 behind the backup quarterback. Then everything just goes to the dumpster lit on fire. They didn't have anyone who could play quarterback after that. Cardinals have 2 players that can play quarterback. It's like the Bears did last year, and there's no controversy at all. I don't want Drew Stanton starting out there I didn't want Drew Stanton out there starting if Carson Palmer's healthy. That doesn't make any sense. But I'm happy. I'm okay with Drew Stanton starting.
Yeah, and I think that's where you have to be at and I think I tweeted this earlier, is the thing that's going to bother me the most is Carson Palmer is going to have a Carson Palmer game. I mean, he's Carson Palmer. He has those games where he throws 2 interceptions or 3 interceptions. It happens multiple times per year. So just get over it now and don't start calling for Drew Stanton, because it's one of those things. Stanton is a guy that I talked with a buddy as we texted each other back and forth about this, as I was kind of joking around about, maybe the Cardinals can get a second rounder for Drew Stanton right now. I said that completely in jest. A lot of people took it seriously.
And I chuckled. I chuckled at that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people took it seriously. But my buddy and I were texting, and he said Drew Stanton's the guy that I completely trust taking this Cardinals team to 7-9 or 8-8. But Carson Palmer's the guy that got you at 10-6 last year, and I feel like he's the guy that
he played a bad half of football. He did. He played a bad half of the season.
And I feel like he can get you to 11-5, 12-4. That's why I said this year. I had him at 9 wins, and I think I had him winning the first 3 games of the season. But I wouldn't be surprised if they won 12 games. Like, that wouldn't surprise me at all, because they have a lot of talent. I think we're both surprised that they're doing it still with a really good defense and a mediocre offense. But I think that mediocre offense more comes from the fact that Drew Stanton's your quarterback. And I don't think anybody was thinking – nobody was thinking, this can be a mediocre offense.
No, and you look at it, they still put up 23 points. There were a lot of plays left out on the field there that Stanton could have had. I mean, and then no quarterback makes every single throw. Peyton Manning misses targets. Tom Brady misses targets. Aaron Rodgers misses targets. Drew Brees does. But there seemed to be a number of opportunities that Stanton was like, oh, goodness, that if only.
Yeah, and I think that's where you're kind of at right now, is you just watch the offense, and there's really no question about who you'd rather have at the helm of your offense. I think people are getting caught up too much in the quarterback wins thing as opposed to what the play on the field is doing. In the end, I think Stanton's the quarterback. Stanton is Alex Smith, where you want him as your quarterback because he can manage a game, make a couple throws when he needs to, and you'll be good to go. Well, Carson Palmer may not be at the level of guys like Manning and Breeze and Brady and those guys.
It's Cutler McCown.
Exactly.
McCown.
It is. McCown came in and played great, and he did enough. Cutler, on the other hand, he's a guy you may be able to win a championship with. They got to a NFC championship game with him already. I think it's similar with Stanton and Palmer. Come December or January, when the bullets are actually flying and plays need to be made, I think Palmer can make the plays and Stanton can't. Now, maybe it's just that Stanton has never had the opportunity to, so that's all he needs. But that's what my opinion is.
Well, and I like the Alex Smith comparison, and I give Alex Smith more credit than a lot of people do. He just doesn't have to. I mean, he didn't attempt the stat that came in this last weekend. He didn't attempt a pass over 10 yards, but that was Miami was dumb. They played right into what Kansas City likes to do. And they just did exactly what they wanted, and they put up 34 points. Alex Smith is a guy you can win with. Drew Stanton might be is probably a guy you can win with if you have the right talent. When the Cardinals built that team, they built it with the idea that they didn't need a superstar at quarterback. That's why they traded Kevin Kolb. They thought he'd be a good quarterback, and that's what they have with Drew Stanton, which is really, really kind of fun. And at least in 2 games. I mean, 2 games. Small sample size, 2 games in 4 years. But, yeah, still great story. Let's come to the close of this. Are we ready? A couple of things. Almost into this story. The bye week. Good, bad, indifferent for the Cardinals. I'm going to say there is no negative to this bye week when it is now because, one, they get 2 weeks to prep for Denver, which is a very good thing, especially since they're on the road. They get 2 weeks to prep for it. And this team needs a rest. They need to get healthy. They need Carson Palmer back. They need to get Tyrann Mathieu back a little bit more. They need Antonio Cromartie to be healthy. They need to be healthy going into week 4. And so there's no negative to the bye week being this early. It might come back to bite them in the butt later in the year if they're banged up again. But it works out perfectly. 2 of the toughest games they have on their schedule they have on the road. Against Denver. You got the 2 weeks to prep for it. And then at the end of the season, they'll have an extra couple of days because they play Thursday night football in St. Louis, and then they get the long break. So they get the 10, 11 days to prep for Seattle at home.
Yeah, and you just look at it and you wonder, how are they going to get prepared? How are they going to get ready for this? And where do they go from here? I mean, you're there, obviously. So what do you think on Palmer?
Well, I haven't seen Palmer, but they're playing it really coy. Today he threw the ball for the first time, and he says he's good. I think he'll be back for Denver, which is they really need. I think they're going to need Palmer because they will probably have to put up more points than Stanton is capable of leading them to.
Yeah, and then you kind of hit the nail on the head on this run they have here. I've been cautioning a lot of people on Washington because they're playing so well. The win-loss record doesn't necessarily show it, but they're putting up so many points. They have one of the best offenses in football at this point, and that's after the incredibly awful week 1 with RG3 at the helm. So you kind of just watch it and you look at where they're at right now, and I think you're happy because you and I talked about it at the beginning of the season, and they're kind of at where both of us thought they would be. You look at it and you say, hey, you're where you need to be. You're winning the games you need to win, and you set yourself up now for this second half of the season. And kind of like what I talked about at the beginning of the season, this was broken down into three parts, and they're kind of entering that second part now, where they have the Broncos and the Redskins. They get the Redskins at home, which I think is a really big thing, and then they have to go to Oakland, and then after that it's kind of the gamut, and you have to be the gauntlet of teams, because even St. Louis is kind of playing well right now.
Yeah.
I think
we thought they'd be able to put up 31 points.
Yeah, I know the Cowboys defense is terrible, but yeah, I mean, you look at it, like you said, the Rams game on Thursday night, and that gives you 10 days for Seattle at home, and it's just they did what they needed to do to start the season, because it allows them to come out now, and they're going to be able to they have an easier time going forward, because now all of a sudden, if you, for whatever reason, in these next 4 games or 5 games, if you go 3-2, well, you're still at 6-2 heading into the last 8 games of the season, and I think you're very comfortable with that. Starting with that Rams game on November 9th, because then you've got 2 games home, then you've got a pretty tough, especially now the Falcons look like they're good again, you have 2 pretty tough road games back to back, and then you have your home away to end the season, including your last 3 against the division. So like you said, it was important to get out to this start. I think October 5th is the litmus test of how quote unquote real this Cardinals team is. There's no moral victories in the NFL, but I think if they keep it close and they come out, and even if they lose, but it's a 24-21 type game, and you're like, oh wow, you held the Broncos offense to 24 points. I think going forward, you look at that and you go, that was in Denver, for a Broncos team that was coming off of a loss that they really didn't want at that early in the season, and they're on a bye, so it's kind of that whole they've got the same amount of time as the Cardinals, so it's not like the Cardinals have any advantage going into this game. So it's pretty much as clean of a slate as you can get. So I think that's what you want to see.
And goodness, you said exactly what I want to point out is that I don't expect the Cardinals to win. It's kind of crazy to say to expect the Cardinals to get a win in Denver. It wouldn't surprise me per se, but the fact that I would take a moral victory if they play Denver tough. If the defense can hold up and not get shredded like Dallas held them, I'm not Dallas, Seattle held them there till the very end, until Peyton, rallied them quickly to the tie before overtime. That's what you want to see, because I the more I look at this team, this Cardinals team, I see defensively they're every bit as good as Seattle, the way they played so far. And I think they've got a more explosive offense. At least they have a greater potential offensively than what Seattle has. Call me crazy. And so this is where I'm going to get to ask the question. What is this team? What is it? Are we ready to declare them true contenders? I think so. I getting that division win at home and looking at the teams that they did, because San Diego is a good team. San Francisco is odd, isn't it? They're a talented team. They're down, but they're talented. This is a team that you say, okay, this isn't the fluky 4-0 of 2012. This is a legit 3-0. The Cardinals have made a statement. They are in this league. They are in business. They mean business this season for the postseason. And I'm ready to say, okay, they got that win against San Francisco. They're in business.
Yeah, I think in business is what you kind of want them to be, is that they are 100% for real. And the question becomes how good, what's the ceiling? And I think the ceiling is going to be defined more by their play within the division, and obviously they're 1-0, so that's a huge start, than it is by anything outside of God, you don't even want to say it, but anything outside of a Super Bowl berth. Because if they're not able to win in the division still, if they for some reason end up going 2-4 again in the division, or God forbid 1-5 in this division, then you're going to look at that and go, yeah, the start of the season was great, and maybe they end up going, just 10-6 again, but 5 of those 6 losses are in the division. You're not making the playoffs, and we saw that last year.
Ding, ding, ding. That's exactly it.
And that's where, so like I said, unless you find a way to, go undefeated outside of the division, and maybe then you're a giant mess in the division, and then get to the playoffs and avoid your division opponents and get to a Super Bowl. But until that happens, I think you're measuring this team based on how they play within the division, and so far so good. Now you got to build on it. Like you said, you have a chance against a team that a division opponent beat. Obviously, you're going to whatever Mile High is now called, and you have to play Denver in Denver, where Seattle got Denver in Seattle. So I think that's a slight difference. But like I said, no moral victories, but you want to see Arizona come out either with a close loss or a win. No blowouts, no going back to crap. Are we back to square one at this point? I think that's where you're at.
All right, there we have it. That brings us to the end of our show, where we are getting ready for the Arizona Cardinals to have a bye. Revenge of the Birds Radio will take a bye as well. We don't have an appointment this weekend, so I will not have a guest from Mile High Report. I hope to do that next week. Seth and I will take next Tuesday off, as we won't have any game to talk about. But I will, ideally, I will get somebody from SB Nation's Mile High Report to join me for a good little while, as we can talk about the game next weekend, not this coming weekend, but next weekend, as the Cardinals will be playing in October and playing in Week 5 against the Denver Broncos on the road. This is Jess Ruth. That's Seth Cox. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. Thank you for listening, and you'll hear from us in about another week. Have a good night, guys.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.